There was a monster that lived outside the entrance to an ancient Greek city. It asked a riddle of everyone who wanted to come into the city and everybody who wanted to go out. If the riddle could not be solved, the monster would devour the traveller. The riddle was simple. What is it that has 2 legs, 3 legs, 4 legs, and is weakest when it has most legs? And hundreds would die every day because they couldn't solve a simple riddle like that. And then Oedipus it was who came up with the solution. He said, it is man. He's on 4 legs as a baby crawling around, and that's when he's at his weakest. He's on 2 legs as an adult, and then later in life, he walks with a stick, and so has 3 legs. So Oedipus solved the riddle of the Sphinx and saved the city. The world sets you and I a riddle today, but man is not the answer to this riddle. He is the riddle. The question we must all answer at some stage is, who am I? Oh. There we go. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? Am I here by design? Am I here on purpose? Does my life have meaning? Or am I just a speck of dust on the surface of a tiny planet in the backwater of one of a trillion galaxies? We must answer these questions, because if there is a 0 at the end of our lives, then everything else along the way is a 0 as well. The answers that we give to those questions ultimately affect how we see others, how we see ourselves, and how we will choose to live. In the 19th century, Henry Thoreau observed that, quote, most men live lives of quiet desperation. How much more so is that true today? Suicide touches 2,000 Australian families every year. That's 6 suicides every single day. Suicides you won't get to hear about because newspapers don't publish details. Anxiety and depression alone costs the American economy over $110 billion annually. A cost to the nation second only to heart disease. Depression, depressive orders are appearing earlier in life. 50 years ago, the average age for onset of depression was 29, whereas recent statistics indicate it's fallen to 14.5 years in today's society. We live in a world where young men shoot others in the name of God, where children disappear from their own front yards, never to be seen again, where women's bodies are trafficked as though a commodity, a place where the elderly are forgotten and often overlooked. In ancient Greece, there were 2 theatres, one for the comedies, one for the tragedies. The tragedies were always the most popular. They always pulled the largest crowds. Nothing much has changed today. Why? Because people remember a sadness longer than they remember a joke. Even in the best of times, we are hauntingly conscious of life's fragility and how our fortunes can often turn on a dime. You've heard it said that God died in the 19th century and man died in the 20th. More people died in conflict in the 20th century than all the previous centuries put together. Murder makes sense if you believe there's no God. If anyone gets in the way, just get rid of them. The atrocities in Ukraine in recent days remind us that human beings seldom learn from the lessons of the past. And the reason for that is that it's not just the planet that is sick today, man too is sick. It's the message of philosophy, man is sick. It's the message of literature. Man is sick. It's the message of the arts, the 6 o'clock news. Man is sick. It's the message of the Bible as well. Man is sick. And as we've already heard today, the disease is sin. You know, people can laugh at the notion of sin. They can dismiss it as just one of those absurd, antiquated concepts that out-of-touch people hang on to. But what they can't laugh at is the manifestation of sin in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their country, in their hearts. Even just a casual glance at newspaper and television, who cannot help but be overwhelmed by the reality and the enormity of evil in the human heart? How much pain we are capable of causing each other, how much damage we can do to this planet that we call home. Jeremiah had it right when he says, the human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? That is why we need the cross. That is why it matters. Hanging between heaven and earth, Jesus did for you and I that which we could never have done for ourselves. He solved our sin problem. We must right-size our view of sin before we can ever fully comprehend and celebrate the story of the cross. It needs context, and that context is the story of sin and the way in which it has been a blot on not only our earth, but on the lives of people. You see, Adam represented the entire human race. Whether you consider that to be fair or not, our fortunes were tied to his. Our fate lay in his hands. When he failed God's test, we suffered the penalty alongside him. Not only is our time on earth brief now, but on our slow journey to the grave, we get to watch the selfish, sin-filled choices and actions of our fellow sinners inflicting so much hurt and destruction on the world. And that would have been the tragic cycle of the human story for eternity if God had permitted it to continue. Had it not been for Jesus, had it not been for the cross. Because you see, Jesus as the second Adam took us, our sin, past, present, and future, took them all to the grave with him and buried our sin there. You died to the hold that sin had on you 2,000 years ago. In Jesus, you're represented. And you didn't do a single thing to earn it. You didn't even ask for it. But that's the difference that Jesus has made. Jesus was a game changer. The Bible tells us that we metaphorically died with him, we rose with him, and we're even seated alongside him. And all of these things will become physical realities in time. Because of him, your death in this life will not be the end of your story. The cross bridged the gap between God and man, because with the shedding of blood, it paid in full the price that God exacted for humanity's rebellion. We no longer need to worry about what God thinks of us, only what he thinks of his Son, in whom we believe. As well as vindicating the moral law, the cross demonstrated the infinite significance that God has conferred on you and I by taking human form and dwelling amongst us. The cross reaffirmed that our lives have value and meaning. The cross promised the certainty of resurrection to a new form of future life that will know no end. The cross was the most significant event in all of history, as Tom reminded us a short time ago. It's the fulcrum upon which the rest of human history hangs. But my guess is that if you asked 100 people what they considered to be the most important event to have occurred in the last 2,000 years, you would be hard-pressed to find more than one or two who would identify the cross as that event. How can that be? This most profound event that changed the course of history and infused man's future with hope. How could it be so easily ignored? Because no one likes to be thought of as a fool. And the cross is foolishness to those who don't bother to investigate what it was all about. And I guess who can blame them? There was no more dishonorable way to die than on a cross. Even the worst of the Romans could never be crucified. It was always reserved for the foreigners. And even then, only for the lowest of the low amongst those foreigners. It was reserved only for those whom society was most ashamed of. Only they died that way. Christ hanging on the cross doesn't sit well with our picture of modern day heroes. How easy it is to be ashamed to acknowledge the cross in our postmodern society. We live in a world which chooses not to look at the cross any longer. And ironically, we are at a time in history where the world is most desperately in need of the message of the cross. Everywhere we look, we see loss of hope, pessimism about the future, but few are willing to embrace the solution. The Bible has a very relevant picture of this in a story from 2 Kings chapters 6 and 7. These two chapters tell the story of a city that's under attack. Samaria was under siege, and there was a great famine in the land. People inside the city were starving, literally living on garbage. Friends, that's a picture of the world. Most of the world is living on garbage. And then several lepers decide to go outside the city and take their chances with the enemy. They've got nothing to lose. They're going to die anyway. Maybe the enemy will throw them a few scraps of bread from their tents. So off they go. They sneak out, sneak over to the enemy camp, raise the flap of one tent, look inside, no one there. But lo and behold, the table is set for supper. So they say the blessing and they tuck in. Then they dig a hole and bury all the jewels that they can find, and they decide to take a chance on another tent. Sure enough, it's empty as well. Raise the flap, say the blessing, tuck in. You see, God had delivered Samaria the night before, had scattered its enemies during the night. And suddenly one of the lepers has a pang of conscience. What we are doing is not right, he says. This is a day of good news. The word in Hebrew there, the same as the word for gospel in the New Testament. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. So they go back to the city, but no one believes them. They've been delivered, but no one knows about it. They don't believe the lepers. They go on eating the garbage. What an appropriate picture of our world today. That's our world in a nutshell. You and I are the lepers, the outcasts who take a chance on a life outside the city. It's only those who are hungry, who know their need, that ever find the gospel. And yes, we have a duty to take that good news back to the world, but don't be surprised if they don't believe it, don't believe you or want your message. But it doesn't change the fact that the world has been delivered and that the bread of life is there for you and it's there for me. And it doesn't alter the fact that the cross is still changing lives today. The Archbishop of Paris shared a story in an interview just recently about 3 cynical young men who were visiting the Cathedral of Notre Dame. They saw the crucifix outside and began to laugh about religion and talk about how shallow it all was. Their talk led one of them being dared to go inside and tell the priest that all of religion was just a joke, that there was no meaning to it, and that all priests were just a bunch of fakes. So he accepted the dare and he went inside and he told the priest exactly what the boys had dared him to say. Instead of defending himself, or religion for that matter, however, the priest simply said, "Son, I can see you're somebody who likes a deer. I'd like to give you one in return." The young man was curious. The priest continued, "I dare you to walk down to the front of the church, look up into the face of Jesus hanging on the cross there, and I want you to say, 'Jesus died for me, but I don't give a damn.'" The boy felt like he had no choice but to take on the dare, so he walked to the front of the church, looked up into the face of Christ, and he said, a little nervously, "Jesus died for me, but I don't give a damn." He came back to the priest. The priest put his arm around him and said, "Oh, my boy, that was too easy. Almost anyone can do it the first time. Go back and do it again." So the boy returned, and this time his voice faltered a little, and the words only stumbled out. "Christ died for me, but I don't give a damn." He made to leave. He wanted out of there. But the priest stopped him and challenged him, "Son, do it one more time and then I'll let you go." So the boy reluctantly returned to the cross one last time, and he stared up into the face of Christ. He looked at the head crushed by thorns for all the wrong things that you and I have thought. He looked at the hands nailed for all the wrong things we have done. He looked at the feet, nailed for all the wrong places that we have gone. And no words came out. The boy returned to the priest and he said, "Father, I'm ready to make my confession now." The archbishop finished his story by telling his audience that he was that boy all those years ago. Our primary purpose as a church is not to tell the world to give up drinking, pay tithe, and eat nut meat. Our message is not one of good views, but of good news. And the good news is that you and I paid the price of our sin, past, present, and future, 2,000 years ago in our representative. The Bible tells us that if one died for all died. According to scholars, you died on Friday, April the 3rd, AD 33, at roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jesus, who knew no sin, was made sin for you and I, so that we could receive the righteousness of God through him. And as a result, God no longer sees in you the vileness of the sinner, but only the likeness of his Son, in whom you believe. When they laid the cross on the ground, it pointed north, south, east, and west, symbolic of all those whom he said would feed at the table in the kingdom of heaven. When they raised the cross upright, it joined heaven and earth, east and west. It reaches out to those wise men from the east who visited him as a child, and those from the west who had desired to see him just before his death. It points west to indicate where the gospel message will go in the direction of Rome. And yet it points east to include those to whom Christ has already been revealed. Everything in the story of the cross was to show its universality. Think of the lettering above his head. The lettering of the Jews, the religion of the world, the lettering of the Romans, the government of the world, the lettering of the Greek, the culture of the world. Here's a universal phenomenon marked out in these hieroglyphics. The cross embraces all cultures. It is for everyone. And like the thief on the cross, who is, of course, you and I, we cannot pay God back a single thing. We can only just hang there and accept his undeserved grace. Hard, isn't it? Paul speaks again and again of the free gift, the free gift, the free gift. Have you ever known of a gift that wasn't free? We're so reluctant to believe it, you see, that it needs to be repeated. That is the good news, and that is the news we are to take to the world. You know, at the beginning of time, a flaming sword was drawn to block the return to Eden. At Calvary, Jesus Christ took that sword by the handle and sheathed it in the soil of Calvary. The cross, you see, was an inverted sword. Nope, didn't work. The message of the cross is that all the barriers between God and man have been replaced by the simple invitation that whosoever will may come. Kneeling at the foot of the cross, says one writer, a man has reached the highest place he can attain. If you believe on the cross of Christ today, you stand before God as one who has never sinned. You are assured of a life beyond this one. You're counted as righteous no matter who you are or what you've been. That is the good news of the cross. It is the good news of the Easter message. Let us never be ashamed of it. For in the words of Paul, it is the power of God at work, saving everyone who believes.